His coffin was white. Daniel had not expected that. He had pictured oak, dark, honest wood that matched the woman who had spent 40 years refusing to sugarcoat a single hard truth in her life. But the funeral home had called it pearl ivory, and Daniel's Aunt Renata had nodded as though that settled everything. And so here they stood, in the front pew of St. Matthias Church on a Thursday that smelled like old incense and fresh grief, staring at something that looked more like a cradle than a casket. He was 34 years old. His mother, Eleanor Vanek, beloved mother, cherished sister, tireless servant of the Lord, according to the laminated card pressed into his palm at the door, had been 61. The aneurysm had come without warning mid-sentence, while she was telling Daniel's voicemail that she'd found an old box of his school drawings and thought he might want them. She had not finished the sentence. The voicemail cut off between drawings and whatever came next, and for 3 days after her death, Daniel had listened to that recording 17 times, trying to hear the rest of the thought in the silence. He sat in the front pew with his hands folded in his lap, very still, the way he always went still when things became too large to move inside. Behind him, he could hear the shuffle and murmur of maybe 60 people, neighbors, old parishioners, a few faces from Eleanor's quilting circle, 2 women from the hospital where she had volunteered on Thursday afternoons for a decade. Daniel knew most of them only barely. His mother had been a woman of wide, shallow acquaintances and exactly 2 deep loves, God and her son. Father Benedek was officiating. He was an old man, older than Daniel had realized, seeing him up close for the first time in perhaps 20 years. He had confirmed Daniel at 14, stood over him with oil-slicked thumbs and intoned words Daniel had since more or less forgotten. Now he moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that his joints were no longer reliable partners, and he read the scripture in a voice like gravel settling deep in dry earth. "Death is not the end," Father Benedek read, and Daniel thought, "Say something I can use." The Mass lasted 50 minutes. Daniel received communion out of habit and courtesy, and when the final prayer was spoken, he stayed in his seat a beat longer than everyone else, listening to the organ play something he did not recognize while the congregation rose and filtered toward the exit. Aunt Renata touched his shoulder once and he nodded, and she moved on, understanding him the way women who have raised children always understand men who cannot cry in public. He was standing, finally, smoothing the front of his black jacket, when he felt the hand on his elbow. Light, dry, almost papery. He turned. Father Benedek was standing closer than was comfortable, close enough that Daniel could see the fine red lines in the whites of his eyes and smell the altar wine still faint on his breath. The old priest's face was doing something complicated. It was the face of a man who had rehearsed an action 1,000 times and still found in the moment of execution that rehearsal was not preparation. "Daniel," he said, quietly, not a greeting, a confirmation, as though he had not been completely sure until he said it aloud. "Father," Daniel waited. Father Benedek glanced past Daniel's shoulder at the thinning crowd. The gesture was small but unmistakable, the quick, angled look of a man making sure he is not overheard. Then he met Daniel's eyes again and said 6 words in a low, flat voice that had none of the liturgical warmth it had carried 10 minutes ago. "You are not who you think." The church was cold. Daniel had noticed it when he walked in but stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a persistent sound. And now he noticed it again, acutely, as though the temperature had dropped another degree in the half-second it took those words to reach him. "I'm sorry," he said, which was not what he meant. What he meant was, "Say that again, say it differently, say it so I understand what game we're playing here." Father Benedek's grip on his elbow tightened. His knuckles were pale. "After tonight they will come to the house," the priest said. "Eleanor knew this day would come. She made me promise 30 years ago, she made me promise that if she went first I would tell you, but not there." He tilted his head in the direction of the exit. "Not at the house. It is not safe there anymore." "Father," Daniel kept his voice level by conscious effort, My mother just died, I don't. I know what your mother just did, Father Benedict said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word mother in a way that stopped Daniel completely. I knew Alina for 35 years. I loved her the way a man of God is permitted to love, which is to say, truly and without reservation. And I am telling you now, before God in this house, that she asked me to do this. She asked me because she trusted no one else to do it right. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. The last few mourners were moving through the rear doors now, letting in brief cold rectangles of gray November light before the doors swung shut again. Soon, they would be alone in the nave. "What are you telling me to do?" Daniel asked. The old priest released his elbow, reached into the folds of his cassock with a hand that trembled slightly, not with age, Daniel thought, but with something else, something that looked closer to fear, and produced a small brass key on a simple ring. "Don't go home," Father Benedict said. "Go to the rectory, the side door, not the front. There is a room below the sacristy, third door on the left. This key. There is a case. Your mother left it there 6 months ago when she first got sick. She said you would know what to do with what's inside, but only after you had read everything." "And if I just go home?" Daniel said. Father Benedict looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite fear, and occupied the uncomfortable territory between them. "Then by morning," he said, "you will have no home left to go to." "I the key." Daniel did not go to the reception. He texted Aunt Renata a half-truth about needing air, pocketed the brass key, and walked around the side of St. Matthias to the rectory door the priest had indicated. A low wooden door set into the stone of the church's north face, painted green once and now mostly weather and memory. The key fit. Of course it fit. The door swung inward on hinges that had not been oiled in some years, and Daniel stepped into a low corridor that smelled like old stone and candle wax, and the particular coldness that old Catholic buildings accumulate like savings, as if God prefers his architecture slightly below room temperature. He counted the doors, 3 on the left. The third was smaller than the others, no more than 5 feet high, and had a second lock below the handle, the kind with a round brass plate, into which the key also turned without argument. The room beyond was barely a room at all. A stone cell, perhaps 8 feet square, lit by a single bare bulb on a pull chain. Against the far wall, a metal shelving unit bearing cardboard boxes, an old missal, a folded altar cloth. And on the lowest shelf, incongruous as a heartbeat in a library, a hard-sided aluminum case of the kind used to transport camera equipment or surgical tools, gray, latched on both sides, with a combination lock on each latch. Daniel crouched in front of it. His own birthday, 112190, nothing. His mother's birthday, 030763. The latches did not move. He sat back on his heels and thought. Then he tried the one number he had never once heard his mother reference, the number she had refused to speak aloud his entire life, with an insistence so complete that her refusal had itself become a kind of presence in his childhood. The number on the address of the house she had grown up in, the house her own mother had sold when Alina was 12, the house Alina called the first house, when she called it anything at all, which was almost never. 4718. Both latches opened. Some combinations are not puzzles, they are confessions. Inside the case, nested in pre-cut foam, was a manila envelope sealed with tape, a burner phone still in its packaging, a USB drive, a photograph, and a handwritten letter in his mother's unmistakable angular script, the handwriting of a woman who had learned penmanship in a decade when penmanship was still considered a form of character. He picked up the photograph first because it was on top and because photographs, unlike letters, do not give you time to prepare. It showed a man Daniel did not recognize, broad-shouldered, mid-40s in the picture, dark hair going silver at the temples, standing in front of what looked like a government building. The man was wearing a suit and holding a briefcase and squinting slightly against sunlight, and there was something in his posture, A way of standing that Daniel felt he recognized in the way you recognize a word in a language you studied for only one semester, but never forgot entirely. On the back of the photograph in his mother's hand, his name is Carol Vanek. He is your biological father. He is alive. He has been looking for you for 22 years. Everything Alina. Daniel sat on the cold stone floor of that small room beneath the sacristy of St. Matthias Church for a very long time with the photograph in one hand and the letter in the other, and he did not read the letter right away. He looked at the photograph. He looked at his own hands. He thought about the fact that his mother had been 61 years old when she died, which meant she had been 27 when he was born, which meant she had been, at the absolute outer edge of the math, perhaps 26 when this man in the photograph had existed in her life. He had always been told his father was dead, not killed, not absent, not estranged, dead, a word with a period after it. Thomas Vanek, his mother had said, had died in a car accident 4 months before Daniel was born. She had shown him a death certificate once. He must have been 12 or 13, in the particular phase of adolescence when boys begin pressing at the soft spots of adult narratives. And he had looked at it and believed it and put it away and moved on, the way you move on from things that are confirmed and therefore closed. Now he read the letter. His mother wrote in the careful, exact way she spoke, no unnecessary words, no sentiment dressed as fact, no apology where explanation would serve better. She wrote that Thomas Vanek had indeed died. She wrote that he had died violently, not in a car accident in the spring of 1990 in a city that was no longer on any current map, because the country it had belonged to had ceased to exist. She wrote that Thomas Vanek had been a courier, not a postal courier, she clarified, with the dry precision of a woman who did not trust ambiguity even in confession, and that the people for whom he had couriered had, upon his death, developed an interest in his pregnant wife that was not the sympathetic kind. She wrote that she had run, that she had come to the United States with false papers arranged by a priest, not Father Benedict, she noted, a different priest, a braver one, and that she had built her life here with the focused determination of someone who understands that safety is not a state but a practice, that she had given Daniel the name Vanek to keep him rooted in something true, but that the rest of his history had been constructed for his protection. She wrote, "The man in the photograph is not Thomas. Thomas is dead. The man in the photograph is Carol, Thomas's brother, your uncle by blood, who has spent more than 2 decades trying to find you not out of affection, but because of what your father carried and what, by inheritance, you may still carry without knowing it." Daniel set the letter down on his knee and breathed. Outside, muffled by stone, he could hear the wind making shapes against the church's north face. His mother had lied to him for 34 years. And the lie had been, she wrote with the precision of a woman speaking directly to the recording angel, the truest act of love I know how to name. He picked up the letter again and kept reading. What his father had carried was not an object. It was knowledge, specifically, testimony. Thomas Vanek had been present in the summer of 1989 at a meeting in a concrete building in a city that no longer existed, at which certain arrangements had been made between certain men that would, if made public, not merely embarrass the surviving parties but put them at the kind of legal and physical risk that makes embarrassment seem quaint. His father had written down what he witnessed. He had done this in the way of a man who is not certain he will survive long enough to deliver testimony in person and wants the words to exist regardless. He had sealed that account and entrusted it to his wife. Alina had kept it. For 34 years, through the building of an American life from scratch, through the learning of a language, through the raising of a son alone, through Thursday afternoons at the hospital and the quilting circle and the slow accumulation of ordinary days that are, she wrote, the only real shelter there is, she had kept it. She had kept it because Thomas had asked her to, and because she was Alina Vanek, and Alina Vanek did not put down what she had promised to hold. The testimony was in the manila envelope. The USB drive contained a digital copy, she wrote, along with the names of 3 journalists in 3 different countries who had been attempting to build the broader story for years and who could be trusted with what she had never been able to bring herself to release. At the bottom of the letter, in slightly larger script, as though she had lifted her pen and set it down again before writing this part, "I kept you safe by keeping you ignorant, and I am not sorry for the keeping safe. I am sorry only that I cannot be there to hold your hand while you read this. You are the best thing your father and I made, Daniel. You are the only thing we made that lasted. Now go, be careful. Trust no one who comes to the house tonight. Trust Father Benedek. And please, do not be angry with me for very long. I did not have very long to spare. IV what comes after dark." He opened the burner phone at 8:17 in the evening, sitting on the stone floor with his back against the metal shelf and his knees pulled up, and discovered that his mother had already programmed a single contact into it. The contact was labeled simply M. The message thread below it contained exactly one message, sent from the phone 3 weeks earlier to a number with a Prague area code. The message read, "He will contact you after I am gone. Tell him what you told me. He is ready even if he does not know it yet." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. His mother had been sick for 6 months. She had known she was dying, apparently, with the same matter-of-fact knowledge she brought to everything, and she had spent some portion of that dying arranging things, setting dominoes in the right order. She had purchased a burner phone. She had contacted someone in Prague. She had come to this church, to this room, with this case. She had told Father Benedek what to say and when to say it, down to the words, "You are not who you think." He dialed M. It rang twice. "Daniel Vanek," said a woman's voice. Not a question. The accent was Czech, or close to it, the particular flatness at the ends of words, the weight distributed differently than in English. "Yes," he said. "My name is Marta," the woman said. "Your father was my colleague. I have been waiting for this call for a long time. I need to ask you something before anything else." "Ask." "The envelope, have you opened it?" He looked at the manila envelope in his lap. The tape was still sealed. "Not yet." A small pause. He had the impression of someone in a different time zone, sitting in a different kind of dark, exhaling. "Good," Marta said. "Don't open it alone. There are 3 pages inside. If you read them, you need to be somewhere they cannot take you before morning. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "Who is they?" Daniel asked, though he thought he already knew the shape of the answer. "The men who killed your father," Marta said, without any particular drama. "2 of them are now quite senior. One of them you would recognize the name. They have known about Alina for some time. They allowed her to live because she was quiet and because they were not sure she still had what Thomas left her. Her death," a pause. "Her death changes their calculus." "They'll come to the house," Daniel said, Father Benedek's words landing differently now, clicking into position. "Tonight." "The house," Marta confirmed, "and then wherever else they find you, unless the envelope reaches the 3 people on the drive before morning. If it is published, even the summary, even the first page, it changes what he gains by your silence. A living witness is useful. A dead one who has already spoken is not." In that cold room beneath the church, Daniel understood that his mother had not been protecting him from the past. She had been protecting the past, keeping it intact, usable, explosive, until he was old enough and the world was ready enough to use it. He stood up. His legs had gone partly numb from the stone floor and he had to plant one hand against the shelf to steady himself. In the foam of the aluminum case he found, beneath where the phone had been, a folded piece of paper. He had missed it, with a handwritten address in a city 1 hour north by train, and beneath the address in his mother's handwriting, a single additional line. "Your father's sister lives here. She knows you are coming. She has been waiting to meet you since before you were born. V the train north." He left the aluminum case in the room under the sacristy. He took the manila envelope, the USB drive, the burner phone, and the address. He left through the side door, the way he had come, and he did not go to his car. His car was in the church parking lot, visible, and his mother's letter had said be careful, and he believed in honoring the last words of the dead when those words were practical. He walked 6 blocks to the train station, the November wind finding every gap in his funeral suit with the specific cruelty of November wind, and bought a ticket at the machine with cash from the emergency, $40 he kept folded behind his transit card. A habit his mother had insisted on with the same calm insistence she brought to every lesson, she considered non-negotiable. He thought about that on the train, how many of her small insistences had been preparation rather than habit. Keep cash. No 2 exits from every room. Don't tell the whole truth to anyone you don't need to. He had attributed these things to her general nature. She was a cautious woman, a private woman, a woman who had come from somewhere that had taught her caution was survival. But they had been instruction. They had been 34 years of quiet, patient preparation for the night she had known was coming. He read the letter again on the train, in the half-empty car with the lights overhead doing their fluorescent flicker, and he noticed a sentence he had passed over the first time, near the beginning. I gave you a name that was both true and false, and I want you to understand the difference, because you will feel it and I cannot spare you that. He held that sentence. He was Daniel Vanek. That name was real, rooted in blood and history. He was the son of Thomas Vanek, who was dead, and of Alina Vanek, who was newly dead, and he was the nephew of Carol Vanek, who was apparently not the kind of uncle worth knowing. And he was, if the address on the folded paper was what his mother said it was, the nephew of a woman whose name he did not yet know, who had been waiting to meet him since before he was born. Who was he then? The same person he had been yesterday morning, eating cereal from the box because he had run out of bowls again and hadn't done dishes, listening to a voicemail that did not finish. He was that person plus a father who had witnessed something terrible and written it down. He was that person plus a mother who had carried that testimony through a continent and 34 years like a coal in closed hands. He was that person plus a story that had been waiting, patient as stone, for him to arrive at the beginning of it. Not different, larger, or perhaps just uncovered. The train pulled into the station at 9:43. He stepped onto the platform and found his phone already buzzing, the burner, not his own. A text from M. She is at the blue house end of Linden. She will have the light on. You have 3 hours before I would consider the situation uncontrolled. Move quickly but do not run. Running draws attention. Your father knew this. He walked. The streets were narrow here and old in the comfortable way of towns that have not tried very hard to be something else. And the air smelled like leaf rot and chimney smoke, and the particular darkness of a night with no moon. The house at the end of Linden Street was indeed blue, a faded, honest blue, the blue of something painted a long time ago and maintained rather than replaced, and the front window glowed warm amber through thin curtains. He knocked. The woman who opened the door was perhaps 65, with dark hair that had gone fully white at the temples and eyes that were his mother's eyes in a face that was not. And she looked at him for exactly 2 seconds before her expression did something complicated and complete that he did not have a name for, and reached out and took his face in both her hands, the way you hold something you were told you might never see. Thomas's son, she said, in English that had a river running underneath it. Alina's boy. She pulled him forward and held him, and he stood in the doorway of the blue house with his arms at his sides and the manila envelope pressed against his chest, and after a moment he lifted his arms and held her back. This woman he had never met, this piece of a history he had been denied, and the cold followed them both inside. Vi what the envelope held. Her name was Hannah. She had known his father for 60 years and his mother for 35, and had known Daniel was alive for all 34 years of his life, had known it and not been permitted to reach toward it for reasons she did not resent because, she said, Alina had explained the mathematics very carefully, and Alina had been correct about every difficult thing she had ever said. She made tea. She put bread and butter and cold meat on the table without asking if he was hungry, in the way of women who understand that grief makes people forget their bodies, and she sat across from him and folded her hands and said, "Now." He opened the envelope. 3 pages, handwritten, in a hand he did not recognize his father's. He understood, reading the first line. "I am Thomas Vanek, and I am writing this in August 1989 in full knowledge that I may not be alive by the time it is read." The penmanship was careful in the way of someone writing for posterity rather than speed, and the language was precise, naming names and dates and locations with the particularity of a man who understood that credibility lives in detail. He read all 3 pages without speaking. Hannah watched him and did not speak either. When he set the pages down, she reached over and touched the top page very briefly, the way you touch the face of the dead at the last possible moment, and then withdrew her hand. "He was very careful," she said. "He knew these men, he understood exactly what they were. He was afraid and he wrote it down anyway. This is not a small thing." "No," Daniel agreed. He plugged the USB drive into her laptop, found the 3 contacts his mother had listed: a journalist in Berlin, a journalist in Warsaw, a journalist in London, all of whom were, from the accompanying notes, already in possession of partial versions of this story, and had been waiting for what they called the primary source document for years. He sent 3 emails. To each one he attached a photograph of each page of his father's testimony, and the digital copy from the drive, and a brief note that identified who he was and how he had come by the materials, and offered himself as available for whatever verification they required. He sent the last email at 11:51 p.m., 10 minutes before Marta's threshold of 3 hours. He looked at Hannah across the table. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has waited a very long time for a very specific moment and finds, now that it has arrived, that it is both exactly what they expected and wholly unlike what they imagined. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Hannah said, "it is out of your hands, which is what your mother wanted. She did not want you carrying this the way she carried it. She carried it because she had to. She wanted you to carry it only long enough to put it down in the right place." Daniel looked at the 3 pages of his father's handwriting. 34 years ago, a man he had never met had sat somewhere in a country that no longer existed and written these words in full knowledge of what they might cost him. His mother had carried them across the world and across 3 decades and had gotten them here, to this table, via a route that had required her to lie to her son every day of his life about half of where he came from. He thought about the voicemail. "I found an old box of your school drawings and thought you might want them." He would go back for the drawings, he decided. Whatever else happened, wherever this story went now that it was moving, he would go back and get them. VII morning. He slept on Hannah's sofa under a wool blanket that smelled like cedar, and he dreamed nothing. At 6 in the morning, the burner phone buzzed with a message from Marta that said only, "Berlin published at 5 a.m., Warsaw at 5:30. You are known now. This is safer than unknown. Stay away from your house for 2 days. After that it becomes unnecessary theater. I will explain more when I can. You did well." He lay under the wool blanket in the gray early light and held the phone against his chest and listened to the sounds of Hannah making coffee in the other room. The small, precise sounds of someone accustomed to mornings alone who was adjusting, with evident care, to having company. He thought, "I am the son of Thomas Vanek, who was afraid and wrote it down anyway." He thought, "I am the son of Alina Vanek, who carried it and did not bend." He thought, "I have been both of them, apparently, without knowing it." Hannah appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs and offered one without speaking, and he sat up and took it. And the coffee was strong and bitter and exactly correct. And they sat together in the thin winter light, with the weight of the night receding the way all large things recede when morning comes, not gone, but resized to something you can actually stand next to. Tell me about him, Daniel said. My father, not the testimony, just him, what he was like. Hannah wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the window, where the light was coming up pale and serious over the rooftops. He laughed too loudly, she said. He was terrible at cards. He could fix any engine, but he could not boil an egg. He was afraid of dogs, which he was ashamed of. He loved your mother immediately. The first time he saw her, he came home and said, Hannah, I have met the woman I will not deserve, and he was right about that, and he knew he was right, and he tried every day to be wrong. Daniel nodded. He drank his coffee. Outside, the first birds were starting, tentative, early, the way birds begin in November as if they're not quite sure the world has agreed to another day. She said he would have loved you, Hannah said. She told me this the first time I spoke to her after you were born. She said, he would have been ridiculous about the boy, completely unbearable. He would have sung to him and followed him around and been completely lost. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. She wasn't wrong about many things, he said finally. No, said Hannah, she was not. The morning came in fully then, gray and cold and unremarkable, the kind of morning that asks nothing of you except to be present in it. And Daniel Vanek sat in a blue house at the end of Linden Street, 34 years old, the son of a woman who had lied to save him and a man who had told the truth knowing it might kill him. And he held both of those things, and he did not put them down because they were his to carry now, and he was, it turned out, exactly the kind of person who could.